too, since Jonathan responded to it. And of course, I was asked that question by the same person a few months ago during my book launch.
I've developed it. It was from education.
Sir, you asked a question. Let him answer. Let him answer.
All right, calm down.
At the London Review bookshop, I was asked the exact same question. So I'll answer it again. Hopefully this time it will stick.
Remember you also
Nelson Mandela studied at an apartheid university. The oppressed in oppressive conditions of apartheid or colonialism do not have a choice where to go to school. Israeli citizens, permanent residents of Israel, who live in Israel and pay taxes to the Israeli apartheid state, have no choice which health service to go to, which schools to go to, which universities to go to, which ministries to go to for services, social services, health, and any other services. If you want any papers done in Israel and you're an Israeli citizen or permanent resident, like myself, that's the only choice you have. You deal with the state that's oppressing you. You have no other choice except to do that.
Do you want your answer? Do you want your question answered? Can you let him answer? I'm sorry, sir. You took too much time. Can you let him answer?
He chooses to live in Israel.
Can you let him answer? Sir, you're taking too much time. Let him answer. Do you want your question answered before we move to another question? We don't have so much time.
The second point.
Move on.
The second point.
He doesn't want to hear.
Okay, but the second point. The second part of the question had to do with, of course, an extremely exaggerated Israeli propaganda about how much Israel has done to world culture and technology. Regardless of the exaggeration, do you want me to list what Germany gave to the world prior to 1930? In philosophy, in music, in medicine, it's endless. I mean, Germany has given the world a lot in every single field of civilization I can imagine. Did that make Germany not boycottable? Since when do we decide to boycott a racist, oppressive regime, a criminal regime, based on whether it has some scientific achievements or not?
You can't.
The question about the Arab world. Prior to the Arab Spring, I would have been very embarrassed to answer this question. Because while the boycott is extremely popular, I mean, unlike in the West we have to convince people to boycott. So the default is that people do not boycott. In the Arab world, it's the other way around. The default is that people boycott Israel. This is the natural mode of operation for the Arab people, for the peoples in the Arab region. So the problem is channeling this support for Palestinian rights and this natural affinity to boycott to practical, sustainable, effective campaigns. We have not had a lot of that going on in the Arab world. A lot of it had to do with the lack of civil society actions. In several Arab countries, you don't have a very thriving civil society. There's a lot of oppression. And BDS thrives in freer societies, where we can work with trade unions and women's unions and LGBT groups and all kinds of people with their diversities, and Muslim groups and Jewish groups and this and that. That's the kind of environment where BDS grows much, much faster. So China, for example, would be the most difficult state to work in for the BDS campaign, because you'll have to go through the government, the government party, or you don't get any BDS done. There's no one else to deal with. In Western Europe, Canada, the US, although I have a lot of problems with democracy in those countries, and I've spoken about that before, they're democracy in a very relative sense, but this is not the time to critique Western democracy. There's a margin of freedom that allows BDS to grow. Despite that, after the Arab Spring, yes, BDS itself is thriving. So now we have BDS campaigns, not just in Lebanon, which was an early campaign, in Morocco, in Kuwait, in Qatar, in Jordan, in Egypt, among others. We have active BDS campaigns in these countries. And I'll just give the biggest example, the biggest success in the BDS campaign, the economic BDS campaign, actually is in Saudi Arabia. It's not in the UK, it's not in Scandinavia, it's in Saudi Arabia. Although the UK can take credit, PSC, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, chapters have been at the forefront of the Veolia campaign successes. Veolia is a French company involved in the Jerusalem Light Rail, which is an illegal project connecting Israel's colonial settlements with the city of Jerusalem. So it's an illegal project. We've targeted Veolia and Alstom, another French company involved in the project, since November 2008. PSC chapters have been at the forefront in the world in their campaign against Veolia, and thanks to mainly PSC chapters, but also Ireland, Irish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the Swedish civil society, Veolia lost more than $12 billion worth of contracts. But going to Saudi Arabia, in one shot, in end of 2011, Alstom, the French company, lost a contract worth $9.4 billion. Just one contract, $9.4 billion. This is the single largest BDS success in the world since the movement started. It took 3 years of campaigning, Palestinian civil society, and a lot of supporters in the Arab world, in Europe. There's a whole campaign in Europe called Karama that's focused on Alstom specifically, that has helped this work. And it's different than Karama, which is a Palestinian Ministry of Economy campaign. It's another campaign in Europe called Karama, a civil society campaign. After 3 years, we managed to pressure the Saudis to drop Alstom from the Haramain train line, which connects Mecca with Medina. Some Israeli propaganda outlets, media outlets tried to say, oh, this was just a contractual thing. You know, Alstom lost because their bid was not as good as the others. In response to that, the Saudi embassy in Egypt issued a clear official statement saying that Alstom was excluded from the bid, the Haramain train project, because of its involvement in the illegal Jerusalem Light Rail project. So that put that to rest. It was a clear-cut BDS victory that has passed. The final question about the anti-BDS legal challenges, legal warfare, what Israel calls lawfare. This is a very important part of the anti-BDS campaign that we should not belittle. Israel has failed in the battle for hearts and minds, clearly. They're not winning hearts and minds. They have strong governmental relations, a lot of influence in Congress, a lot of influence in the mainstream media, and that will keep going for quite some time. But at the grassroots level, we and Israel know they're losing. Not just a member of Knesset Ben Eliezer is saying they're losing hearts and minds, but also we are seeing increasingly that there's a loss. Israel is losing more and more at the hearts and minds level. However, the only resort they can go to is legal suppression. The only thing that Israel can do at this stage, after failing to debate us, in the rational debate battlefront, they lost miserably. In the actual attempts to suppress BDS campaigns, they failed miserably. Trying to use the anti-Semitism spear did not work for a movement that's based on international law and basic human rights for everyone, and that's totally anti-racism and opposes every form of anti-Semitism. It did not work, and especially with the presence of so many prominent Jewish intellectuals, activists, feminists, academics in the leadership of the BDS movement in the West, the anti-Semitism charge did not quite work. The last thing they're left with is the lawfare, trying to pass laws that make it illegal to do advocacy for BDS. In fact, Israel did pass the first such laws. Last year, in July last year, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, passed a law that basically considers any Israeli citizen or permanent resident, it targets Israelis, not internationals. Any Israeli who supports, advocates for the boycott of Israel or any of its institutions is liable. It's considered a tort. So any institution in Israel that loses money, claims to lose money from a boycott campaign, can go and say X advocated for the boycott and to take him or her to court. And the court will find him or her guilty and make them pay a fine without having to prove any correlation between the damage done to that company, the claim of damage, and the advocacy for the boycott. This is one of the most reactionary, repressive, draconian laws passed by Israel in quite some time. But as I jokingly say, this is the first draconian law passed in Israel that's not racist. It targets everyone, Jew or Arab alike in Israel. Anyone who supports the boycott is treated equally. So it's a very egalitarian law. But it's a very serious challenge to the BDS movement because Israel has enormous influence in the West at the government level. As I said, not at the grassroots level, but at the government level. In the US, yes, they're trying, but it's a very difficult battle for them even. Because of the civil rights history in the US, freedom of expression is extremely taken seriously in the US. Until now, despite Bush and despite the neocons, freedom of expression in the US is still an extremely important issue, far more than Europe, in fact. It is not easy for the US Congress, regardless of how beholden they are, how occupied they are by Israel, to pass such a law to suppress basic freedom of expression. So it's a battle. Not easy, but not impossible.
Okay, thank you, Omar.